Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Lawless, Manager of Live Content for the US and Canada regions at AVIXA, and welcome to Choosing the Right Event, brought to you by our sponsors Yamaha, Unified Communications, and Kramer. I'm being joined today by DreamTech CEO Victoria Neeson, Convene Senior Director of AV Technology Michael Judah, and moderator Falami Jenkins from Curve the Runway's digital event strategist. Before I hand over the presentation to Falami, there are a few housekeeping items. For those viewing today live, the webinar qualifies for 1 CTS, CTSD, and 1 CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view on your transcripts. And for any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. You'll have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. And the webinar will be approximately 45-60 minutes and all attendees will be placed on mute. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so today's presenters can address them throughout the webinar and at the end. To access this Q&A window, simply move your cursor at the bottom of your live stream video box to locate the Q&A icon and type away. And now Falami, on over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Welcome, everyone. I would like to start with Victoria Neeson. She is the CEO of DreamTech, an international company that provides virtual events, live streaming, video production, and studio builds. Next, we have Michael. He is the Senior Director of AV Technology with Convene, a New York-based meetings and workspace facility that has successfully transitioned over to virtual events. Welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thanks for
Hi guys, thanks for having us.
So we've been just dramatically just pulled into a new normal these days, and I wanted to be able to talk with you. So Michael, can you please let me know about how have, life changed for you as a AV technology director?
I haven't noticed anything's changed yet. I mean, all kidding aside, I think when I have these conversations and people inquire about what I do, there's sort of the pre-COVID world, there's a post-COVID world, and imagining the eventuality of the post-COVID, right? Or sorry, mid-COVID and post-COVID world. So historically, as a meeting and events provider across the US and with an international expansion on deck, I was responsible for overseeing the day-to-day AV operations at our meetings and event sites, as well as our flexible workplace offering. I also managed the teams that were responsible for engineering and maintaining and implementing new AV systems. So we are dependent as a meeting and events provider on people occupying physical space, and COVID, as a result, has completely derailed that. And we, having our expansive customer base, decided to make a dedicated turn and pivot into the virtual meetings and events world to service our customer base, as well as go out and be able to reach a new customer base. And the way we're approaching virtual and we're really looking at it is it's a bridge back to the physical environment for us. So we have so much real estate in the US that is not going to go anywhere, right? And we want to be able to ensure that this COVID gap between where we were at March and where we will be in the not too distant future, we can integrate the virtual technologies into the physical space as well. So everything we're building is sort of purpose-built and driven towards getting back to the physical world and being able to integrate both virtual and physical locations and remote presenters as well as a remote audience as well.
Bringing it all together.
Yep.
But Vicky, I just know that you've been in virtual events for over 8 years. Within the last 6 months, how have you seen things overall change for your company?
Yeah, I mean, as you just said, Falami, we've been running digital events for many years for our customers, and so the technology and services aren't new to us. And in fact, we've been evangelizing about the power of virtual events for some time, and there's kind of been a bit of a reluctance to move from an IRL environment to an IDL environment. Mm-hmm. But we have found that once customers start doing it, they like it, and there's kind of not much turning back. Now we find ourselves being catapulted into this new world of virtual events due to COVID, through lack of choice. And what we're actually seeing is people are embracing the technology. They're pushing the boundaries in terms of like the content, the experiential, the programming, you know, the whole experience of having a virtual event, and they're starting to see the efficiencies and potential. So the impact on my business, you know, as well as me doing video production and live streaming and studio builds, has been exponential, you know, and we've seen that everybody now wants to be an event planner.
Yes.
We're calling it the democratization of events because, you know, everybody wants to know about events, and you know, and the demand for the services has been significant, and I don't see it letting up anytime soon.
Yeah, everyone wants to be an event planner, but it's getting harder for someone to kind of jump into it, you know, with blinders on, especially with all the technology that you need to understand with going into virtual events.
Absolutely. It's a bit of a minefield, and
yeah,
you know, and that's kind of what we're here to do, is to help our customers navigate through that minefield.
Yeah. So with the
there's a misconception that virtual events are easier. I think that's a byproduct of tools like Zoom, Teams, and WebEx, and some of the household names, and the simplicity it is to connect and have a fairly good experience. And while that was a great stopgap at the beginning of COVID, the desire to do more complex, more robust events and meetings adds layers of complexity that maybe meeting and event planners, and now the newly, you know, appointed meeting and event planners, are unaccustomed to. So inherently, virtual meetings and events definitely become more complex than the physical meeting counterparts.
Agreed.
With its complexity, I feel like people need to understand the different styles of engagement. You know, with people having an increased need to engage their clients virtually, you know, we have a lot of corporate, nonprofit, and small business meeting planners that are completely puzzled. So if we were looking at everything from webinars to virtual conferences, how should we look at this? How should we be looking at the different styles of engagement?
I think, Victoria, this is going for you, because in our pre-pro, you were talking about how you stay fluid and agnostic.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, you know, we believe the key to getting the best out of your virtual event, there's a number of areas you need to take consideration into. You know, it's really puzzling, and you know, and there's a lot of confusion, but we recommend that, you know, to our customers, that they break it down. So first of all, you've got to know your audience. You've got to build that demographic profile, figure out if they're tech savvy and how they're going to kind of, you know, adopt the technology, and if they're likely to engage in a virtual experience. So all of those things need to come into play. And you also need to be able to define a format, you know, in the same way that you would design and build out a program for a live event, you should be doing exactly the same for a virtual event, because they do come in many shapes and sizes. And it might be that you have one event where one person is taking the stage, or you might have an event where it's a bit more collaborative, and it might be, you know, it could be a workshop. So the programming element of the virtual event is very important. It needs just as much attention. And then you need to choose your platform. And, you know, we have decided that the best course of action is to just be completely agnostic, because there are so many event platforms out there. There's a ton more coming. You know, some of them are more traditional, kind of legacy type platforms. Some of them are new software startup businesses. And they all have their own kind of unique functionality and features, but every event is different.
Yes.
So what it's important to do is to just figure out what your event is, with all those parameters that I've said, you know, knowing your audience, knowing the demographic, understanding your program, defining it all. Then you're able to match the platform, I think, to the event that you're looking to execute. You know, and there's other things to consider, like who's going to be your host, you know, get a good, strong MC, how are you going to attack the marketing? But the key things are, you know, understanding the audience, defining the program, and then selecting your platform.
Yeah, it's a great point too. There is no silver bullet when it comes to virtual meetings and events, as there is no silver bullet to physical space. There's always
Correct.
barriers in a physical space, usually capacity, locations, or specific functions it can accommodate. And that's no different in the virtual meetings and events world, at least for now. So it's very critical to, again, map out what the journey looks like and what are really the non-negotiable key features that a platform has to have. I think the other thing to take into account is the stakeholders are different than they were in physical events. In physical events, it's usually up to the meeting planner or the financier to sort of select where things happen. Now more than ever, IT and security are involved in platform selection, especially for those meeting and event planners who are working with larger enterprise, maybe in government or fintech or anything with really tight restrictions. So for any sort of communication to happen in that environment, it has to run through the IT department. They have to be able to approve it. So that's really going to dictate what is available to you and what choices that you do have. So it's, again, very key to understand who the audience is as well as who the presenters are and where they're coming from. And just this, speaking from personal experience, and we were talking and sort of pre-show, was we have a high profile law enforcement event tomorrow with senior members of federal and local law enforcement. Mm-hmm. There's connectivity issues on the presenter side, but there's also connectivity issues on the attendee side as well. So those are some special considerations that you should take into account when selecting your platform.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Michael. And I think what we're seeing is with a lot of these kind of startup platform companies, you know, they're trying to sort of sell into these large tech businesses and finance businesses, and the security is a big deal. You know, and we saw some issues with Zoom, didn't we, at the beginning with security? And you know, I think the same thing is happening with some of these other startups. And so, yeah, I think it's really, that is another driving factor, you know, as well as, you know, figuring out who your audience are and all of the other points, making sure that the platform is secure and does what it needs to do for your business.
Yeah. One of the things that I try to explain to some of my clients is that a lot of times when you want to have a webinar, it's one way you're giving out the information. There's a lot of just one way of flow of information. And then when you have a virtual event with these conferences, you have a little bit more of interaction. There's information going back and forth. You have a little bit more of that. So when looking at how you want your flow of information, how are you guys kind of looking at, you know, the different styles of platforms available?
Yeah, the interactivity piece is something that is probably the most commonly requested feature set, probably the big, like the $1 million question when it comes to meeting and event planners is how do I get my attendees to engage in a similar fashion that they do in the physical world? I think you can't, right? There is no one-for-one replacement. You can't necessarily replace the spontaneity that happens at a physical meeting and event, and that's usually the biggest driver for going to a physical meeting and event is the spontaneity of social interaction, or you know, connecting with a peer or someone you haven't seen in a long time. So that's a huge consideration when it comes into it. But I think back to Victoria's point, it's really content driven, right? No one wants to be talked at for 4 or 5 hours virtually, especially when you have a lot of distractions, whether on your device or in your work environment, which is most likely your home. If you have children, your partner, it's very difficult to focus on anything for 4 or 5 hours. So it's very key to consider what is the ultimate goal. If it's to deliver specific content, right? Maybe micro-sizing that and making those like smaller little chunks over the course of multiple days versus a 4 or 5 hour chunk. If you're looking for more interactivity and you're moving people between different activities, there's probably more of an appetite for 4 or 5 hours worth of content. What most people are doing now, especially in the virtual meeting and event world, is like, here's my physical day of agenda. Can I just do this virtually? I mean, inherently the physical day of, you know, let's take the meal breaks out of it, right? So you automatically take away about 2 hours worth of an 8 hour day, right? So you're now already down to 6 hours. So it's just sort of being judicious about how you move things around and maybe thinking about doing stuff in different ways that you could never do before in the physical world. You could never take 8 hours of programming and stretch that out over five days in peak season in October. You know, that would cost you a fortune and would probably like be ineffective monetarily.
Yeah, and I think the other point to make here is the programming and the content is, as you said, Michael, really important, and the experience, you know, and we're finding that some of the events that we're designing and developing with our customers, there has to be an element of you know, experiential in there. So you know, breaks in the program, you know, doing something fun. You know, we've had customers that have brought in musicians, you know, to play, you know, just to play a couple of songs in a break, just to kind of just take the monotony out of the event and just break it up. And also interactive, being, you know, making sure that the event is interactive, making sure that the audience can engage in a meaningful and interesting way. And sometimes that means breaking the audience out into small workshops and giving them a task. That gives them the opportunity to meet other people, which we would do in an IRL event, but then coming back into the general session and sharing the findings with the rest of the virtual audience. So there's definitely things you can do to sort of make it more exciting and engaging and experiential, and you know, especially for longer programs where content, you know, where there is long content, there's a lot of content.
Absolutely. I just feel you can think about an event where if you're planning something virtually, it's still 80% is the same as in person. You have about 20% of technology changing. And most people who are used to teaching in a certain setting, in an in-person setting, they know that usually an individual has to shift their body every few minutes. And especially if you have someone sitting down in a virtual conference for a long period of time, you have to make sure that their body is moving in order for the mind to focus. So in order to get the mind to focus, you have to consistently make sure that people are moving and engaging in a lot of different ways. So I feel like breakouts, music breaks, something
Yes.
to get the body moving in order for the mind to continue to stay focused is pretty important.
Yeah. I think measuring that focus too is key, right? And so engagement tools are like a way of measuring comprehension and like sort of gauging where the engagement is, right? Ensuring that people are interacting and participating within the session itself. So there's the movement inside the session, and there's like movement between sessions that naturally happen at a conference or an event, and trying to recreate that virtual environment goes a long way.
Yeah. So thinking about moving, you know, in between sessions brings me to the subject of data analytics and ROI. Going virtual, we have a greater way, a more diverse way of being able to track information about our attendees and how they're actually interacting with these different platforms. If you can you let us know how organizations can now start utilizing this information, and maybe how they can start monetizing all of the information that they're tracking with the different platforms?
I think
You go first, Michael.
I've got a very heated, I guess, opinion about data and data collection, and ultimately is data that does not inform decision making is useless, in my opinion. And so while data is this selling point and advertised, people should really consider what you're able to do with it. I think data specifically in the virtual meeting and events world, when you're tracking engagement, where people are spending their time on a platform where you have the ability to move virtually, is very beneficial for things like sponsorship opportunities and ads. So if you have a highly branded and highly sponsored event, and that's most of where your funding is coming for that event, that data for your sponsors is critical for their marketing and ad campaigns. So I think that is like the number one use case. Second is obviously tracking who registered and who actually attended. That's very easy to do, usually day of, because you either hand out badges or people are scanning in and out. That's really critical in the virtual environment as well, to measure your attrition and then gauge whether or not this was a successful event, if attendance is like a KPI for you at the end of the day. And I think it's also critical in platforms that can measure where people are spending their time on the platform to help inform what you're going to do for future events. So you can say, no one entered this magician breakout session, they don't need to do that next time. Or it seemed like the breakouts were really slam packed and overfilled. Maybe I do more breakouts or less breakouts conversely. So those are sort of the three biggest buckets for me when it comes to data utilization, and then how you analyze it and how you apply it as well. But don't just get data for the sake of data and do nothing with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Victoria?
I mean, I would agree with everything you've said, Michael, actually. I mean, apart from the existing data points, that you can get, like attendee registration and engagement, satisfaction, lead generation, etc. The sponsorship thing is definitely important, and there's a lot more deeper analysis going on there. What are the most popular sessions that I attended, that the audience attended, as you said, what documents were opened, what demos were viewed more, which group channels had more attendance. All of those things, I think, are starting to give businesses a much deeper insight into the profile of their attendees, and then they're able to shape the next event, and the next event, and the next event, and they just keep getting better. And I've said this several times, these virtual events are going to continue to get better, because it has to be a viable alternative to IRL events, and it will continue to get better with the data.
I wonder if from a data perspective, how different is the data that you're collecting in the virtual platform different from the physical and in real life world? I mean, you probably get some more utilization of where people spend their time, but generally in the physical meeting and event space, it's been registration, day of attendee,
Yep.
and sort of satisfaction measurement, right? And those are three pretty important things, right? That drive your future programming. I mean, with all these extra data points that you may be able to collect from virtual, is there really a difference between what physical meetings and events we're collecting versus what the virtual? I mean, even with sponsorships and exhibitors, there's always the good old like QR and badge scan, did all that work. So
I think there's more of an opportunity with virtual events, actually. I think that there's much more of an opportunity to learn behaviours, and those learned behaviours can then drive businesses to create events that are very, very suitable to their audience. I think you'd have more of an opportunity doing that in a virtual world than you would do in a physical world.
Right.
And I think, like I said, I think we're just going to keep seeing it get better, and how the audiences are being tracked, and how they're behaving when they're interacting with an event. That data is going to be used to just continue to improve.
So with the data you've been able to track, Victoria, do you feel like you're seeing productivity increase?
I think it's going to take a time, because there's a period of time that you've got. Remember that, yes, whilst virtual events have been around for a long time, the market hasn't actually looked at it quite like this. It's always very much been an add-on, and not really a viable contender to a live event. Now, obviously, we're all forced into this world where it has to be a viable contender. So I think it's still early days, but I'm very confident that we will see an increase in productivity once businesses have figured out how to analyse the data and then use that data analysis to shape their events and redesign their programs. I think we will see an improvement, yeah, for sure. Just can't tell you when.
I think virtual events just get better by nature of repetition too, because it's so new. And I think anyone who tells you they're a virtual meetings and events expert, that may not be completely accurate, because I think we're all learning on the fly here. So I think as meeting and event planners get used to planning virtual events, they'll learn the nuances and specificities that lead to successful events. Same thing with the teams executing. I mean, we're meeting and event professionals, and we are now in the thick of executing virtual meetings and events, and we are learning something new every single day. And that is informing our product roadmap, and that is constantly evolving and changing every day in response to what our customers need, and then also what it takes for our team to be able to execute and operate these things. So there's this innovation period that's bred out of necessity as a result of COVID that will ultimately lead to really stable, viable products that are great options, even in a world where physical meetings and events are accessible. When you look at the potential reach and scope that a virtual meeting can provide, and if it can achieve the meeting and event goals that you or your customer desire, then that's a viable product. And it can even happen perhaps at a fraction of the cost that a physical meeting or event may have cost you historically, like in the past. So the innovation is not just as a stopgap, but I think innovation toward a really great future where you can have physical only, virtual only, and then an amalgamation of the two.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was chatting to Michael the other day about this. My kind of thought around how businesses will approach supporting their employees to attend live events. You know, and as these virtual experiences get better, you know, if a member of staff comes to me and says, well, I want to fly to Vegas or I want to fly to New Orleans to attend this event, it's going to cost X $1,000. My first question is going to be, well, are they hosting the event virtually? Can you attend it virtually? And let's look at the cost of doing that versus the cost of actually attending the event in real life. So I think we're going to see some of that as well, you know, playing out. And I don't want to take away that IRL, you know, event. You know, I just wouldn't want to take that away because there's always a place for it. And it's a very, very important way of holding events and networking. But I do feel that we're going to get a bit of that from our business leaders, just, you know, trying to justify and question the cost of attending a live event.
I think historically, physical events that have had some monetary gating to it, you want to drive as much physical audience to that as humanly possible. So if you had a virtual experience, you probably devalue the virtual experience to force people into the physical experience. That may not be the case anymore just because of corporate travel policies, right? Just prohibiting you from travel, health and safety, or maybe budgetary reasons, the fallout of the economic crisis we're experiencing. So historically, when we've done physical meetings and events, we've always had a virtual component, not always, but a lot of our customers required a virtual component, but it was always very secondary to the primary audience in the room. So it was, what's the absolute bare minimum that I have to do to take this room and get it to the outside world for a fraction of the audience that's physically here? That dynamic now shifts because that virtual audience could be the larger of the two audience or equal. So that audience's priority and the emphasis and time you spend on that audience increases as well. So that's going to really shape how we plan and execute events. Also, not to get long-winded, but we have a year where we've had no physical events. And so what's interesting about that is it creates a baseline of data of 0 events that you can measure all your historical events against. So I think it will force people to look at their events in the past and compare what has happened to their trajectory as a result of not hosting those events versus years where they've been able to do so. Like scientifically, you've created a control group. I think moving forward, it'll force some people to say, did we actually ever really need these events? Do they just go away and never come back because we have data to say it wasn't really that valuable to begin with? Or do we need to reimagine it and put it in a new format, whether it be virtual or physically in a different capacity?
Well, I have a question from Robert Kennedy that I'd like to ask you guys. He's asking that the industry has an incredible opportunity to collect data over the past 6 months. I agree that the technology will greatly improve. What do you think will be the greatest and most unforeseen changes to come?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Robert. I think my first initial response to this has been, it would be, yeah, I think you've hit on a good point about the technology is going to improve greatly. I think that's going to continue to improve, and I think from that we will start to see more creative things being done in events. I don't know if you recently saw the Apple launch. It was pretty good, and it was very cool, and it was very engaging. And I think, you know, we're going to start to see a lot more of the experiential, clever, cool stuff happening. I'm not necessarily saying they're unforeseen changes. I think they are going to come. And I think it's all going to be about, you know, the experience of that event and how good it looked and how creative it was. And you know, and using AR and even VR technologies to take it to the next level.
Yeah, it did a good enough job. I signed up for the pre-order on Friday, so it did what it was supposed to do.
Exactly. They sold it to you, Michael. So I didn't, but I still thought the event was very good.
I think I might take a different approach to this answer. And what's very interesting with mass amount of the population working from home, and now enterprises moving to either some sort of hybrid policy, or companies like Dropbox, who just announced that they are moving fully work from home for the foreseeable future. I think they're even getting rid of their real estate. I'm actually curious to see technology-wise what happens in the home work front, and specifically when it comes to internet connectivity at the consumer level. One of the great things about an enterprise is their access to robust internet and redundancies and things of that nature that create unified experiences. But with so much of the workforce at home and so many virtual meetings and events taking place at home, this will impact it. Is what do some of the consumer level internet providers do to provide a higher level of service and better experience, and maybe provide like a prosumer tier for those who are overly dependent on home networking to do their jobs and to run virtual meetings and events?
Awesome. We also have a question from Tabisho Makumi. Tabisha is asking, how does one monetize these services from a technical point of view? For instance, you offer various platforms to government or private sector, ensuring that everything always works seamlessly.
It's a great point. I think what we're starting to experience is need for skilled technical services. I think at the beginning of the crisis, most users were sort of scrambling and trying to do what they can and trying to figure it out and do it themselves, and have quickly learned that the increased need for complexity that creates these great virtual meeting and events require technical services and technical teams that are proficient and able to actually go ahead and execute that. So I think you're going to see an increased demand for technically skilled labor to execute virtual meetings and events. And that's Convene's approach. And historically, who we've always been is we put people first, because people connecting with people create great experiences. And we did the same thing in the virtual world. So it's a very tech forward, hand holding experience, which yield great results in the long run. So I think virtual meeting and events are essentially turning into TV broadcasts, to get those really great level, great quality experiences where you have these seamless media playback, slide changes, great, layouts of speakers, color correction, and all those fun things. I think that's the level of quality that people are going to start to demand and deserve to distinguish it from your day-to-day Zoom, Teams, go-to WebEx meeting.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michael, as well. And I think, we try to encourage our customers to pre-record their video content, because that enables us to do a nice post-production piece on it. But what we're finding now is that people actually want to go live. They actually want to do it live. And obviously that carries a much bigger risk because of all the points you just raised about home internet, and I see that Robert's raised another point about cable providers doing a bad job when there's a surge in usage. That's obviously a challenge that we're all having to battle with at the moment. So for us, it's really trying to encourage our customers to pre-record, because that can give you a much better output. But then accommodate live where it's relevant and where it's really needed, and not just go live because it would be fun or it would be cool, or let's think about the risks that we take when we do go live in this home working environment, and in a controlled studio space it would never be a problem. So all of those things, like when we're talking to customers about building out their event programs, we do try and recommend pre-record where they can.
Meeting and events sort of have a fluidity and improv nature to them, right? There's this in the trenches mentality that you and the catering staff and the technology staff might have on site, and your ability to sort of connect, create a meeting at the end of the day. Like there's, Flami, as a meeting planner, there's a million things that are going to go wrong in a day. It's inevitable. It's how you respond to things going wrong. And quickly get things back on track, where it still seems like a magical experience for the attendees. The challenge in virtual meetings and events is the second something goes wrong, it is unmaskable, right? So there's a certain level of militancy and structure and rigidity that you have to put into place for virtual meetings to create that seamless, flawless experience. And I always hark back to TV productions and like news, for example. So if they have a remote segment and that person cannot connect, like that segment's gone. It's completely out of the agenda and we're on to the next thing. That can't happen in like meetings and events. You can't just completely like take a panel out, remove it from the agenda, and it's something someone may have paid a ticket to come and see. So creating structure and rigidity and putting fail safes into place to make sure that you have a seamless event experience is critical. And that's where a lot of the technical services and things come into play.
Agreed. Well, we've had some customers who've said, it doesn't matter if it's scrappy, it doesn't matter. Which is the worst thing that you could say to a production company, and I get that, but actually as it translates into an experience for the consumer, it doesn't necessarily meet the objective. So I think it's, quality is very important.
Absolutely. So with all of the things that we're able to discuss today, where do you guys see, events going in the future? In 2 to 5 years, what's an average meeting or convention going to look like?
Oh man.
Well, Michael, you're in the convention world business, so you probably maybe got a different view to me. I obviously want virtual events to stay, and I actually firmly believe they will. I think it's going to take a while for confidence to build, for people to want to attend a 6,000, person event. I think there's a confidence issue there. I think that there's a cost issue that comes into it. I think businesses are going to rethink their strategy about who they support to send to these events if there's a viable virtual lower cost alternative. And I think that the virtual event technology is just going to keep getting better. And I hope that the internet cable companies address their issue as well. And I think with all of those things coming together, I don't feel that IRL will disappear completely, but I do feel that there will be a very strong link to virtual in some way, and we all keep using the word hybrid. And I think that's how it's going to play out, and I think it will be here to stay.
I think we envision virtual as our path back to the physical world, and we envision a world in 2 years where almost every physical meeting has some sort of virtual component associated with it, whether it's bringing remote presenters into a room and getting those presenters out to a virtual audience, or any permutation of where the audience is and where the presenters are. It's almost inevitable. And so for us, it's really fun. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about a month ago in a car ride, and I was telling him about what was going on at work and building a virtual meetings and events platform and what does the landscape looks like. And after about a 15-minute diatribe, he looked at me and he said, well, so what you're saying is the AV nerds are ruling the world now. And I was like, yeah, we're sort of stepping out of the shadows, and we're sort of the impetus and the conduit forward for communications and meetings and events in the future. So virtual is going to be a huge piece of everything that we do. And I agree with Victoria that it's going to be its own standalone product as well. Again, when you weigh that opportunity of, can I do this reaching a larger audience than I could with a physical world because I'm not bound by the constraints of 4 walls? Can I monetize it, et cetera? And if it checks all the boxes, then why not? And if it's something that you can execute. But I think it's worth noting that the virtual component and hybrid component to all this is there's a real emphasis on technology now more than ever. Most meeting and event planners know it's, don't pee off your AV team. It's like peeing off your waiter. It's going to end up in bad service. And, if the food comes out late, that's one thing. That's an interruption to the experience. If the AV goes down, it's a showstopper at the end of the day, right? So there's going to be more of an impetus on technology and deployment and application of technology. That's going to force meeting and event planners to think about a lot more how they reallocate their budgets. Where do you spend your time? Do you now select venues for technology versus physical location or aesthetics or access to amenities potentially, right? It's going to depend on each one of those variables. I'm excited as a technology person, of course, because we get to play with more stuff and do some cooler things, but it's going to
and I think when you take it down to sort of a bit more of a basic level, if you look at what happened when we went into this lockdown situation, my mother was using Zoom, it was just like people have now kind of got used to using these technology platforms, and and I don't think it's something that they will stop, you know, and even when, you know, we do hopefully start seeing some normality, I think that they've just got used to using some of these platforms. They actually quite like it. It's quite easy. And I think that, you know, at that level, if it continues at that level, then it will surely continue in the enterprise world.
Absolutely. Well, Victoria, I know before we started the webinar, you were telling us how you incorporated a news desk into a recent event. Gregory Rushton just sent over a question asking, do you anticipate companies will include studios into their corporate spaces or follow more of a studio rental mode?
It's a really good question, Gregory. And from our experience, we are getting inundated with inquiries about people building their own broadcast spaces within their offices. And, you know, it makes sense to me, because if they didn't have a digital or a virtual capability, they've obviously realized that they have to have it now. What we're finding is some customers that we work with who have live event spaces want to actually build a small studio broadcast capability within the event space. So the idea is that as they start to sort of come back to the world of IRL, I would suggest that the audience will be much smaller, but there will be a provision to be able to broadcast to a virtual audience. So absolutely, people are making the investment and recognizing that they need to make the investment. Purchase versus rental, bit too early to tell at the moment. We've got some customers that just want to rent something because they need to get up and running quickly. And obviously a studio does take a good 6 months to plan and build. But we are absolutely seeing that. Yes, it's definitely happening.
Michael?
Yeah, so we see our physical spaces getting utilized as studios. That's actually a majority of our inquiries right now, is bringing a small subsection of presenters for a virtual event into a physical space. One, they want to guarantee a better connection. Two, maybe they don't want someone's bookcase or living room behind them as the backdrop as well. So we are seeing more of an outsource model, and I think just economically where we are, it sort of forces people into a OpEx versus CapEx mode, where you want to retain capital and not go out and shell what could be a 6-figure or 7-figure sum of money for, you know, in some people's eyes might be a temporary relief, you know, depending on where COVID lands and where we get out of this. So I see it as going a little bit more rental, but I think it is going to be dependent on the specific use case and each enterprise.
Awesome. I have one more question coming in from Clay Cooper. Do you know of a best practices like think tank group where we can go to discuss or get ideas about technical management aspects of production? Thinking more about gear like AV audio, video content, etc., for running the production of a virtual event like audio, video content, etc.
Sounds like a good idea for AVIXA to start a user.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea. AVIXA should definitely kick off a group. Michael, you've got a little user group going, haven't you? But I don't know whether it pertains to production equipment and what to spec. I mean, I've obviously come at it from, you know, I sell studios, and so I can spec studios for customers, but I think what Clay's looking for is more of a think tank group to brainstorm.
Yeah, we created a group of AV technicians, IT technicians, and we sort of replicated off of a group that was based out of the Bay Area here in New York, and we used it as a think tank and sort of idea wall and you know, support therapy and cry group for when you have those really tough days and you need to navigate a difficult customer. So happy to add you to that if that's something that you have some interest in. But I guess, yeah, there probably is a lack of depth for a community for these types of resources. I don't think this is something you can really go to Google and search. I'm sure you can read a lot of blogs and posts from individual platforms about sort of production techniques and values, but those aren't always the best resources. And sometimes hearing it sort of straight from the horse's mouth is, you just need someone to tell you where to go and sort of what to do, or have an idea generation situation. So Those
Yeah, I mean, you might find that some of the key production vendors like Blackmagic, they often sort of have kind of user group type discussions. So it's just, I think it's just a case of doing the research, but it would be great for AVIXA to start something.
Yeah. So Michael, Clay, and Robert Davy said, add them in.
and done.
Well, it's been a great time sitting down talking with you guys. If no one else have any other questions, I can throw it over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. This has been so enjoyable. I just want to say thank you to everyone today for joining us. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So thank you for joining us. Today's webinar was Choosing the Right Event. This recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within about 5 to 7 business days. And if you have any trouble, please contact webinars@avixa.org. And thank you to our sponsors, Yamaha Unified Communications and Kramer. And a huge thank you to Victoria, Michael, and Falami for showing us how to choose the right event in today's world. I really hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you for having us.
Yep. Thanks, AVIXA.